Hi there. So very quickly, I wanted to add this video as part of the Notes on Vue website I'm building, slowly but surely, I guess. And yeah, so the purpose of this video is to fill in one part of the intro material, I guess, where we were talking about the building blocks for Vue. And after we, explained everything that had to do with the syntax and the concepts for Vue 2, then the idea is to have this kind of a challenge here. So the idea is to, based on this image, on the requirements set up in here, we get those and we build something that will be, integrating all the concepts and all of the ideas from what we've read and what we've discussed during the different sections of this Notes on Vue site. So this is going to be a little bit meta because the video will live within here, but since it was also going to be posted on YouTube, then it would kind of make sense for me to provide some context for what this video is all about and why it exists. Alrighty, so yeah, you'll find it in the next section down here or something. I'll post it and then will be available on Notes on Vue. It's a rather long video, but I hope it will be helpful and it will, like I mentioned, basically bring in all the concepts and the ideas into like one single application that we can discuss together and build together as well. Right, let's get into it. So here we are. This is CodePen, and as you can tell, this is the starter pen, which we're going to use to create our application. So the first thing we want to do is fork this pen in order for us to be able to save it later on and work on it. So what we want to do is go down here to this fork this pen button. And when I do that, then it reloads the page, but it gives me another pen. So I don't know, I'm just call it Axel which is my name, right? Okay, so now that we did that, let me show you real quick what the starter looks like, what we have and what we don't. So the first thing you'll notice up top is we are bringing in Vue via the CDN. This is the 2.6.15, if I'm not mistaken, version of Vue. And then we have a little library which is called UUID, and it's version 4. I'll show you later on in the video why we need this or when we use it. We have a couple pointers here. We want to implement a shopping form as well as a shopping list here, and we do have 3 script tags in here. So what we're doing with these is we are extracting, I guess, the template stuff. So we want to write HTML in here, or HTML like code in each of these of the templates, so that we can free ourselves from writing HTML in our JS. So the idea will be more clear as I go through. Okay, so next we have the CSS, and we're not gonna touch this, I don't think. So this is already prepared for you. If you would like to see more, Sass stuff, I do have a playlist in YouTube which is called something checkboxes. We're creating checkboxes, and we're customizing them with Sass. So you want to go there probably. I will link somewhere so that you can see that to get some more guidance on how to use Sass. But this is how I did it. You're obviously free to go into the code and change it and see what it looks like and what works for you. But anyway, so we won't be touching that file at all, or that code. And finally, we do have our code prepared for the Vue application a little bit. So we have our main instance, as you remember. So this is the main instance, and it will be mounted on the main element. So if you remember, we have a main element up here, right there. And the idea will be to mount it there. So there's a couple hints I left in here. So we will be registering locally to the Vue instance one or two or more components, we'll see. And we are providing from the main instance the data property. And in this particular case, notice this is an object. We have the item list here with a couple or a few items already present. So all of them have an ID, quantity label, a done, just marking that I already put that in my cart, in my basket, in my bag. And then we have the price, okay? So, except for the first one, where the price is null. Cool. So nothing is really happening right now, but we can start by showing that list on our application. So remember, we have the main instance in here. What we can do is just render that items list in here. It's not plural, it's item list. Okay. All right. So another one thing I wanted to mention is here, I turn on the console by clicking here. So this is a toggle, and you can see Vue will let me know when something is wrong. Well, in this particular case, I already went a few times in there, but it was telling me you have items list, but I don't see that in the instance, basically. So I did have a typo in there. That's the idea. Cool. All right, but this looks a little bit weird. What I would like to ideally see is something pre-formatted. Okay, so it makes a little bit easier the reading of the data. Alrighty, so that's our list. That's what we want to work with. Cool? Cool. So first things first, we could probably work on the list itself then to be able to show that in our template. What is the idea here? So let me go into the component itself. The definition of the item list component is right here. So from line 22 to 31. As you remember, in the website, we said that these are globally available components. And what you do here is provide the item, the name for the component or the tag that you will be using, and that will be available to you on the basically on the main instance, because this is already a global component. So let's try that. Let's see if we can actually instantiate the item list component. Cool. There's nothing to show here because we don't have anything on the template. So let's go ahead and write something for the list. So let's say hello from the list. All right. So you can tell here that our component is being loaded and it's being instantiated and it's part of the main instance. Cool. All right. So the next thing we probably want to bring into the list. Into the list, we want to bring in the items. So what we want to do is ideally be able to say, okay, I want to pass a list of items to this, and this list will be the item list from the main component, right? So this here is the same as this. This is available to us because we are within the main instance for Vue, right? So as long as we are within these tags, we will be able to have a reference to item list. So we want to pass the items prop, right? So remember, this is equivalent to have a v-bind here, right? This is just the shorthand for that. And we want a prop, which is called items. This is us defining the kind of like the API, the way we are going to communicate with this component. Okay? So this is not implemented yet. We need to do that. All right, let's go into the item list like I mentioned, I left a couple hints in there. So now we want to provide an items prop in there. Okay. And what we want to do now is let's render now that list within the component itself. Let's do that here. Okay. So let me show you something quick. So pre, and then same idea. In this case, we want to get a hold of items because this is this prop here. All right. All right. So let me show you something. This error says component template should contain exactly one root element. So if you ever get into this issue, it's simply because in view 2 you need to have only, like it says, one root, which means we need to wrap that. Let's do that in a div. Okay, so now the component only has one root, which is div, and that does contain the rest of your content. So that's what that error is referring to. Cool. All right, so up top you can see this part here is my list component, and down below we have the rest of the view instance, the main instance, and in this case we are providing the item list. All right, so in order to not make that confusing, we are going to remove now the item list from here and just show the one within the component for now. All right, so what we want to do is now we want to render this in the component itself, and we want to do that by going through all of the items and grabbing their properties and then using those as labels or something so that we can show it to the user. Okay, we'll start with something rather simpler, and we'll do, let's say, an unordered list, and that will have lists in there, right? List elements. So like I mentioned, we want to loop through the items, and how we do that is with the directive v4. This is provided by Vue. So we want now to get a hold of each item in items, right? And v4 asks us to provide a key for the elements we're looping through. So we'll do item.id for now. All right. Notice that we now have 1, 2, 4 elements here, 4 list elements in our unordered list, but we're not showing anything in there. And why is that? Because we need to provide some kind of label in there. So let's render the entire item for now. You'll notice we are spitting out the entire element from our array, and that is being turned into a document object model, a DOM list element in here, right? So this is basically the inner HTML for the list. If we wrap that in a span, now we have a span element, DOM element in here. All right, cool. So now that we have that, what we want to do is only provide the actual information that we want. So in this case, let's wrap everything in a div, and we'll call that the item row. So this is already prepared for us, as I mentioned before, and what we want to do is kind of use that little framework thingy that is built in this pen for us to, you know, show the information a little bit better to the user. All right, and now if you remember the image that we're using as a reference, we will be using some portions for the item itself. So we have one part here which is kind of like that description for the item. Then we have like a button set, right? And then at the end we have a price for the item. So three parts, and we want to do that in our list. Okay, so all of that within the item row. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Okay, so let's do div item description. Okay, and then we have a button set and a price. Okay, alrighty. So now what we want to do here is provide a couple spans. So item label, and we want 2 of those. Right, the first one will have the item quantity, and the second one will have the item label, right? Alrighty, so it's starting to look better. We have the quantity and the label already there, and those are within this kind of item description thingy. Cool. For the button set, we need a couple buttons. So we need the circular button class, and then we want 2 of those as well. All right, and this one button will have a special character in here. And then the second one will have another special character in there. All right. As I save, my CodePen is going to try and format the contents. But if not, you can always do it by hand and try to make it more like your style. Okay. The buttons look a little bit weird, and that's because we still need another class. So this will be grabbed, and this will be remove. Okay, let's see if that helps. Alrighty. Oh wait, sorry, I should do that here. A little bit of a mistake in there. Okay, so we do have those buttons now, and finally we want to show the price in here. So span price tag, and we want to show item dot price. Cool. Okay, so it's taking shape. None of this is already formatted properly, so you can see we're just showing the cents for it, how many cents it costs, but we do have something prepared for that, which is this here, the currency filter that I created. Filters take a name for that and then a function, and set function will take in a value and will have to return however format you want your string to be in for that particular filter. Okay, so what we're doing here is we are returning a string. We are returning a string which has the $sign first, and then we are using the JavaScript interpolation for values like this. So dollar and then the curly brackets here will provide some value, and what we're doing is using that value and then calculating how many dollars, I guess, or in my case Mexican pesos would be if I divided that by 100. So these are cents. Now I'm turning that into another unit. Okay, so the way you use the filters is by using their name wherever you want to format your data. So there's a pipe first, and this tells view I'm going to use a filter, and the filter will be currency. Okay, so that should give us the proper formatting for our values now. Okay, a quick note in here for the filters: the idea of them has been deprecated for newer versions of Vue. Vue 3 does not have filters, I don't think. They are supported. The reasoning behind that is these are bringing some special syntax into your templating, and this is not kind of natural either to JavaScript nor to HTML. So the idea is you can do the same by using a computed value, for example, and you could achieve the same results by doing that. So just be aware of that. I wanted to keep that filter even if it's not the recommended way to do stuff, because you will probably find existing code bases and things like that that are using him. So just for you to know, I guess. Cool. Alrighty. So we have our list, and we have some buttons in here that do stuff, but we are not quite making anything interactive just yet, right? So what we probably can do right now is add more stuff to this list, and let's do that. So how do we do that? We do that by implementing a form, right? So if this was the list, then we want to implement the item form, right? And so you can see now that the error we have is that the custom element item form doesn't exist. I don't know what you're talking about. It says view, right? So what we need to do is provide that item form to the main instance. Okay, so remember how this is a global component. This is available already to the Vue instance, the main instance, because we registered it via this view.component helper. What we are using for the form, though, is a little bit of a different approach. So what we're doing is we are creating a variable, we're creating an object with our form, and we are still using the same options API here. We are passing the different options, the template, data, methods, and stuff. We are telling the component what it looks like, what it's supposed to do, but we're not registering anywhere just yet. What we need to do is grab that variable, and we need to tell whichever component is going to use it that it's going to be available to it. So like I mentioned in our hints, we have the components option in our main instance for Vue, and what we want to do is register item form component in here. Okay, so now that we did that, the error goes away. It reloaded this part here. Let's clear it out, and what we can do now is greet you from the item form component, so from the template, let's say. Okay, so let's go here and say hello from the form. All right, and as I save that, then we get the hello from that component. All right, okay, so what do forms have? They do have your inputs and your buttons and things like that. So let's do that. I'm going to remove this greeting from here right now, and we'll just add a form right now. The action we can get rid of because we are handling everything in our same application. We're not sending anything to the backend or anything like that. Okay, so forms do have an submit event, and what we want to do upon that happening is we want to execute a method or do something with it. And in this case, we want to add the item to the list. One particular thing that we need to do with forms, and especially with this one, is we want to prevent the default event from happening, because otherwise we would still try to connect to some backend or something. The form will reload the page and will try to do more stuff that we don't really want at the moment, because we're handling everything on our side. Okay, so we need to add this .prevent, which is a very handy way to run the prevent default API from the browser. Okay, so notice now that we have invalid handler for event submit. We got undefined because add item is not anywhere yet. So the item form component does not have an add item method, and this is why Vue is right now yelling at us, basically. Cool. So what we do is we go into the item form component here, and then we say you will have this add item method, and just for kicks, let's do add item called, right, whenever that form is submitted. All right, so we're now prepared to handle that event, but we don't have any particular input controls, so we need to add those. So we'll do 2 inputs. And the first one, the important part, will be the V model, and we want to bind that to an object somehow, right? So we want to get the quantity for that, and let's just add a couple more things. In this case, let me do that in a new line. In this case, we want to add item input and then add the class quantity as well. And in here, placeholder will be, just QTY. All right, and our other input will be handling the label, right? And just to make it a little bit more pleasant, item input and placeholder, add an item in here. So these two are not super essential for our purposes, but they just make it look better, be a little bit more usable. Okay, so now what is Vue complaining about? It's saying, I don't know what quantity of that undefined object is. I don't know what you're referring to. I am refusing to work with you right now. So what we need to do is we need to provide which this new item thing is, right? And given that we are in the item form component right now, we are editing the template for that. We just need to provide the new item object in here. Okay, that's it. That's all we need to do, if I'm not mistaken. And now you can see it reloaded, the error went away, and we have 2 inputs in here. All right, we are only missing the one thing that will send the actual event to submit, so the button, and we'll do a class of add button. We want that to just be add here, and for good measure, we'll do the submit type here. All right, I'm gonna save it, and you'll notice that we now have stuff going on. Okay, so I'm gonna clear the console, and you'll see what happens if I start adding stuff in here. And remember that console that we added before? So the add item called is being executed, which means that upon submitting, let me go back here. Upon submitting this form, I am executing the add item method, which in turn is defined down here. Hopefully that makes sense. So we are in the item form component. We are working with its template, and that template has access to both, the data and the methods and everything that is the configuration for that object here. All of the options that we use here will be available up here on the template. Okay. All right, so the other thing I wanted to show is how I can, write anything and hit enter. And when I do that, the same message appears down here. So it doesn't matter if I use the button or press my enter key. That will trigger the add item method because it is triggering the submit event. Just to make that clear. Okay, so but one of the requirements said that this should be disabled while the input is empty, right? Or the inputs are empty, that should have said. Clicking on it will add a new item on top of the list. Cool. So let's take care of the first part. And how do we disable stuff? Well, remember we have the disabled property for buttons, and if we provide the disabled value to that property, that will effectively disable our button. We don't want to do that though. We need this to be dynamic in some way. So Vue has the way to do that, and we can make our attributes dynamic. We can provide different dynamic values to this, and Vue will decide whether they should be applied or not, or what value they should have more precisely. Okay? Okay, in this case now, Vue has recognized that we are trying to bind something to the disabled attribute here, but we're not providing anything with an actual value. So it will tell us that we're missing something. Okay? The value for the expression, for the vbind expression, cannot be empty. So you see here, vbind is the directive, and then the shorthand will be here, colon. One thing I didn't mention is the shorthand for von. Von is the same as the @ symbol. Okay, so what we need to do now is provide what is it that it's going to disable this button. And like the requirement said, as long as I don't provide a new item dot quantity, or I don't provide a new item label, that's when this button is going to be disabled. Okay, so I'm just going to put that here to make it a little bit more readable. It's put it in back. Anyway, let me just show you here. So the button will remain disabled as long as I don't provide either a quantity or I don't provide a label value here. Okay, so it's disabled because that's happening, but as soon as I provide a value for both, then we get the button enabled and we can actually call the method in there. All right, so no value in one of those. I click, nothing really happens, and I press enter key, nothing really happens, and I do t add enter, something happens. Okay, if I remove that from there, nothing happens, same deal. Okay, so we implemented that requirement already. Awesome. What's left now is the actual adding of the item to the list, right? And the way we do that is by actually implementing the add item method. Okay, when we got this starter file or this starter code, you'll notice that we do have the components split already for us, right? So one way to implement the entire application is just one gigantic Vue instance, and everything happens within that, and you're good to go. You can call it a day. But for the purposes of demonstrating how stuff works within Vue and how you can piece it together, it would also make sense to create the separated components and try to communicate them, right? So what we're doing right now is we are creating two components, at least for now, and these are the form and the list, right? There's the main instance, which we can imagine it's the whole rectangle, the outer one here, but they are not aware of one another right now. There's no way for the form to communicate the list, that there should be a change in their values in there. Okay, so there are different ways you can communicate components, and the way we're using right now is going to be via events. So remember, we added a prop to the list where we said we are going to bring in the values from outside. So from this rectangle here within the list, we said there's going to be an item list out here and then an items within that component. So that's one way we communicate from parent to child. We provide from items list, which is in our main view instance, the value into the prop, which is items. So items lives within this component, and then items list lives within the main view instance, right? So we are communicating stuff from the, I guess, the outside of the component, if you will, to the inside of the component via the props. When we want to then say this component also communicates to the parent, to the outside, then we use events. What we want to do is, let me go back here. What we want to do is say, okay, I'm going to take the object that I create here and I'm going to put it outside. I'm going to send it to the outside of my own form so that anyone that wants to grab it can use it, if that makes sense. So once we emit an event with an object that was created here, then the list can grab that and use it. So let's implement that to make it more clear. What we do is we go into the item form, and we essentially, what we want to do is we want to emit an event, which is going to be called add item. And then when you are emitting events, you can provide what is called a payload, right? Payload. Okay, so this variable does not exist yet. We need to create it. Now we have an object. This is an empty object for now, but we do need to fill it in. All right. So the payload we want to send looks something like this. So we want to send a quantity, and we want to send a label, and we want to preset the value of done to false. So I am adding the new item to the list, and I'm marking that as I don't have it in my cart yet, or my basket, or my bag, or whatever. Okay, we now want to provide a value for that. So this dot new item dot quantity, this will be exactly, that will be line 5 here. So this dot new item is available to us because it's magically exposed by view, because we put it as the return value, one of the return values for the data, right? So new item here is accessible to us via this dot new item, and we can do the same for the label. This dot new item dot label. Okay, we are now sending out the entire object. In this particular case, this object, the payload, will be put out there from within the form to the outside of the form, right? So if I do to something something, this was called and the event was emitted. Okay, so now where do we get that? Where do we manage that? How do we get a hold of that payload? Well, what we need to do now is go into the template, and wherever we instantiate our form, we need to provide that output. So we know that the form emits this event, this add dash item, because we just implemented that, right? We just said this part here. So what we want to do is now handle that event. Similar to what we did with the submit event for the form, we're doing for the add item on the item form itself. Okay, so what we need to do is to provide now a handler for this event, and now this handler will live within the main view instance, if that makes sense. Okay, let's do on add item to kind of differentiate between stuff. And this is going to be a handler for this event. So item form is emitting the add item event, and we are handling it via this method. Okay, so this method we need to create, because if not, then view will, yes, yell at us. Okay, so on add item should be a method of, correct, of the main instance. And let's do that then. Okay. So on add item, and what we get on these handlers is the payload, like I said. So the payload in this case will be the new item or your added item of sorts. Okay, so if I unlock now the added item and I spell it properly, we should be able to see it on the console. So let's give it a shot. One new item, enter, and there we go. All right, we're looking good. So hopefully that made sense. We have now a new item in here. So we caught that item and we grabbed it from the event that was happening in here, but we're not yet doing anything with that. We'll do that in a moment. And actually, let me call it on insert item, because this is the same name I added to the finished application, and this way you won't get lost. And we'll keep this as new item. All right, this is what's happening. I just changed the name here for the method. Okay, so one thing you noticed probably, if you were paying attention, is that when we do that, we do have the quantity label and the done value here, but we don't have an ID, and that is important for us because we need that to identify each item. So what we need to do is we need to create yet another object in here that will be also including the ID. So we are going to spread this object, all its values, and we're going to add another property, which is the ID. Let me just show you real quick what happens when I do this. The ID goes here. Okay. So what we're doing is, via this weird syntax, we are spreading all the properties of this new item. We are getting all the properties into a new object, and what we're doing is attaching or appending yet another property, which is ID, and we're adding a value for that so that we get the following. You see? So now we get kind of like the same object, but with another property in there, with an added property. And previously, on previous versions of JavaScript, you would probably see something like object data sign, and then I want to, in a new object, set new item, and then the ID and ID or something. Okay, so let's do my object okay, and I'm going to comment this out, and let's see if that worked for something here. Okay, so this, as you can see, is the equivalent to merging these objects like so. Okay, it's just a little bit quicker to type, a little bit easier to read if you're familiar with the syntax and you know what's going on here. Just wanted to mention that. All right, so we have now the new object that we're creating with an ID and stuff, which is fine, but if we left it like this, all of our objects would have the same ID, and we do not want that at all. And this is where, let me show you up top, this UUIDv4 library comes in handy. So let me remove the string here and use our library now. Okay, so that's kind of like a dependency on for us. So let's do another number here, whatever there, and then we have a unique ID. That's the whole purpose of that library. So none of these are going to be the same whenever we are adding stuff, right? So all of those values will change. They will be different every time, as you can tell here and here, and that's the entire purpose of that library, to have unique values. Okay, awesome. You notice that if I do this, I need to go and manually remove those values from there. So let's improve the quality of the UX a little bit in here by updating the value whenever we're done with the form. Okay, so on the item form component, after we emit the event, we are free to this.new item dot quantity, reset that to an empty value. And then let's duplicate that and see, and set the label value here and run it again. So for something, okay, and then it cleared out, even though I still get the object in there. So now let's do 8 something. So we have our 4 something and then our 8 other thing. Okay, all of them are false and all of them have different IDs. Looking good. So the next thing I want to do is, now that we have the value in our main instance, now I wanted to show it on the list itself, right? So we are logging out the item, but we are not adding it to the list itself. Okay. What we want to do here is, maybe you're thinking about item list dot push, and then if we said this was a variable, item to push, item to push, like that, and then we get that there. Okay, so all I did was extracted that into a variable so that we could log it out and then use it to push it into the array. Okay, so let's do that. 1 something something, and then I add. You see something moved here, but more importantly, it's showing that here, and it says not a number because it can't format it, because undefined is not being able to turn into a number there. Okay, so that worked fine, but we had the requirement that it should go on the top of the list. How do we do that? There's a couple of things we could do. You could probably do something like this and then reverse maybe. So let's try that. Let's do 5 of these. Yeah, that won't happen because push is not returning us the array. It's fine. What you can actually do is use the API for arrays, which is on shift, and on shift will put the new item of your array, the new thing that you're trying to add, at the beginning of the array. So 5 something, now it's on top. All right, that was easy enough. Alrighty. So the next thing would be, let's say to mark them as done here, or as I already grabbed that. Okay, so let's do that. So that should be on our list, and let me remove that message from there. We already know what's going on. And let's do the v on, or the shorthand at symbol, and when a click happens here, then item.done is going to be the opposite of what it already had, which might be enough. You can see we are changing the value there. Now that we have that value changing and we know it's doing it, we can update this state. We can visually show the user something changed. You already have that on your basket. Okay, so the way we do that is we provide a class here, and what we want to do is bind the class attribute to a dynamic value. So I want to add the done class whenever the item is done. So whenever this value is truthy, whenever there is an actual value in there, not an empty string or stuff like that. In this particular case, we know it just goes from false to true, but in this syntax we're saying whenever this is truthy, then I want to apply this class. And sometimes if your class doesn't have hyphens or anything, or dashes in it, you can just provide the name like this. So this should work as well. All right, let me see where it went. Here it is, the binding for the class, and let's mark something as done. All right, you can see there that this is actually working. We can toggle that, but the button is not changing, and we ideally would like that to also change to not cause confusion in here. Okay, and we do a similar thing to the button itself. So we want now to add a dynamic class by binding to that. And like I mentioned, in this case we do have a class which has special characters that are not JavaScript compliant. So let's do grabbed disabled, that's the name of my class, and it will apply whenever the item done value is truthy. Okay, if it's truthy, then it will apply the class just like that. All right, nice. Let's continue and calculate the total. All right, so what do we want now? We want at the bottom of the list, let's see, where is our list? Here. At the bottom of the list, we want another kind of row here, and we'll call it list total. That's the class we have prepared for that. And we'll do a span here with the total of total. Okay, so view is going to complain and say, what is that? I don't know what total is. So this one in here, I don't know what that value is. So here, property is not defined. Whatever you do, you need to provide it as a computed, as a data, or whatnot. So we are within the list. So let's go into that definition, the item list component, and on the computed, what we want to do is provide a total, right? So computed properties are functions that execute when some of their dependencies are updated, and then return a value based upon those dependencies. In this case, let's do just a string. I'm making confused. All right, just a string, my total. Right. So as you can tell now, view is not complaining, even though I didn't put it in data, because it's part of a computed, which is a function, like I mentioned, that returns a value. Okay, and like I mentioned as well, these are values that usually depend on some other thing. In this case, what it depends on is the calculation of the sum of all the values for the price on the items here, right? So what I'll do is I will implement a reduce in here, and I'll explain in a moment what that does. Okay, so first we want to get a hold of the items. This dot, yeah, let's do items. And then we will get a new value based on them. Reduce will take a function like a callback, and that also will take an initial value. So since we are trying to sum up all of the values there, we want to do a 0. Okay, so this is the initial value, and we want to do an accumulating value. In this case, we want a total, and then the current iteration item that we want to get a hold of, right? So this is going to be the current item within the iteration. What we do now is we always return your accumulator when you're using a reduce, and well, in this case we want to get the price of the current item that we are looping through right now. Okay. All right, so you can see now that we have the 9445. It's just not formatted properly, but we can do so really quick by appending our, you guessed it, currency filter. If I save that, now we get the proper total value. This is pretty cool, right? So but this is not going to tell us much right now, because we still need to add the prices for the different items that we add. So if I added something here, then this will break everything, right? So one thing we probably want to do is kind of make our code save here by just checking that there's a price actually available. And if not, then I'll just return the total, right? Whenever I find a value that doesn't have a price, I just keep on moving and don't try anything else. Otherwise, I need to grab the price from this item and then put it back into the total. All right, what then if I wanted to remove an item? So marking it as done is fine already, but what if I wanted to actually remove it from here? What we need to do is go into our remove button and then somehow say on click something happens, right? Probably something like remove me or something like that. Let's try and implement that then. So let's just call it remove. And this is the item list, right? So let's try and see if we can get a hold of the remove method in there. So in that case, we got rid of the error now. And then we can console log remove called. All right. Remove called, fine, that's good. How do we remove it though? We need to get a hold of which item we are trying to remove. So we probably want to pass it down, right? We want to say this is the item we want to remove. Probably the actual ID. And let's grab that ID here and say item dot find index, because we want to get a hold of the index of the item we want to remove, and then let's do item and return the item.id that matches to our ID. And let's log that. Okay. So I'm going to clear here and then try to remove 12 eggs. Okay, items is not defined because I need to refer to that via this .item. So this .items, if I wasn't clear enough, this is the props items here. But check this out. So try the eggs again, removed cold, and we have the index one. So 0, 1, 2, let's try 3. Okay, that worked. So far, so good. Let's try now to actually remove it from here. This .items.splice will be handy here, and we start from the index. We want to remove one element. Okay, so let's see what happens now. Let's try with the 3. Remove was cold. Awesome. So we can mark them, we can remove them, we can add new stuff. All right. And the only thing pending is to add the prices in here. I would like to leave it at that right now because it already turned into something very, very long. But the idea is now that you can go into the finished product, the finished application. Let me show it here. And you will be able to navigate the code, especially now that we've discussed pretty much everything that has been implemented. So what you will find in the finished application is more of the same, basically, more ways to communicate the components. You will notice that, let me see if I can get a hold of that. The item form and item list, they remain the same, but the item list template now has here an item component, right? So what we're doing here is we are creating yet another component that will handle its own state kind of thing, and it will be emitting events for when something happens. So in this way, we are not handling everything within the list, but we are using an individual component. As far as the rest of the code goes, we are emitting events like you can see here, and we are handling those within the components. So we emit this event and we handle that component, that within the component. Same here and here. So these are more examples on how to use that. But for the most part, that's how you implement or how a Vue application would look like. In this particular case is Vue 2, and we will be discussing Vue 3 later on. But there you have it. Hopefully this helped. Let me know if it did. And yeah, we'll keep in touch.